Hello, MotoAmerica fans. It's time for another episode of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and you may even learn something from this unlikely pair and their special guest. The mic is yours, Paul and Sean.
Hello, MotoAmerica fans. This is Paul Carruthers, and this is our weekly podcast, Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. I'm joined, as always, by Sean Bice. And this is our weekly podcast that talks about all things MotoAmerica and sometimes a little bit not MotoAmerica. But our main focus, obviously, is MotoAmerica. And Sean, we've got an interesting guest today, and it made me look up to find out this person is a data engineer or a data engineer, and people say it two different ways. I wanted to find out which was actually correct. And according to our good friends over at Webster, it is data.
Oh, wow.
Data. So she is a data engineer, and we're going to be talking to her momentarily. And her name is Chloe. And I'm going to have her say the French version of her name, which would actually be the accurate one since she is French. But I'm going to go with Lerin until she tells us otherwise, but we'll get to her in a second. How's everything in Sean Bice's world?
Oh man, it's really good. It's good to have. Yeah, I'm excited to talk to Chloe for sure. I mean, it's weird how I seem to gravitate to the electronics people, even though I have no idea what any of those squiggly lines mean. But you know, I'm very fond of Vito Bolognese, as you know, Paul, and even you know, with what Richard does on Attack, and any of the guys that seem to be the data guys that sit at the computer. I kind of admire what they do because it's so fascinating to me. You know, the way it used to be tuning carburetors was such a black art, and a lot of that's become the realm of these data people. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a black art, but it's definitely very technical, and more technical probably than changing needles and jets, but it kind of achieves a lot of the same things. But then you've got all the electronic interventions, which is just mind-boggling to me that can be done. So I'm really excited to talk to Chloe today.
Yeah, it's come a long way. I mean, I remember one of the things my dad was really good at was looking at spark plugs and figuring out jetting.
Right.
And, I mean, that's completely, it's obviously 100% different now than it was then. Although at the end of his career, he was, you know, there was more of the computer stuff was coming into it. So he did have to deal with it a bit, but it was definitely different with the, you know, jets and seizures and things like that you had with high level two strokes. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to talk to her. So I think we should get started with Chloe now. Now, her business card, so to speak, says that she's a data engineer. Now, Chloe, there's data acquisition and there's data analysis. Do you do both of those? Do you specialize in one? I mean, you getting the data for someone else to read, or are you getting the data and reading it, or do you just read it?
Hey guys. Well, I mean, the writer is actually acquiring the data. But yeah, the role of an electronics engineer, I guess, at the racetrack is to set up the electronics, make sure that everything is calibrated properly. And then the biggest job of all is really to analyze everything after all, and just really trying to interpret what the data is saying, correlate that with what the writer is actually saying, and then make changes respective of you know, what the goals are.
Okay, two questions. First, I'm going to have you tell us how to say your name.
So it would be Chloe Lerin.
Okay, well, we're going to go with what I said earlier. You're now Chloe Smith.
Okay, cool.
The second part is I want you to get us started with telling us exactly who you work for. I see two things. I see, is it AIM Sports or is it AIM Sports? And then there's something called Unicornium.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I have a lot of hats. I'm in the process of creating an LLC for consulting. I don't know if it's going to be called Unicornium Engineering. That started as a joke, kind of based on the unobtainium elements. And unicorn is it's a thing. When I was studying mechanical engineering in school, somebody told me one day, "Oh, you're a girl in mechanical engineering. You're like unicorns. You don't exist," or something like that. Or like you're super rare or whatever. And so that kind of was born from that. So at the racetrack, though, I am wearing the AIM Sports hat. So AIM Sports is a company that produces data loggers and solutions essentially for analyzing data through software. And I got started with them just doing my own thing at the racetrack, and then eventually got pretty proficient at it to the point that a lot of people were asking me questions. And I made a couple videos that were using AIM data. And so they asked me to join them for a webinar. So I gave actually from one, I think it led to 5 different technical webinars on their website, and nobody really was doing motorcycle stuff. Mark Young actually had come up for a motorcycle specific webinar. He's another data engineer who works for Disrupt. But really, I mean, there was not that much content for motorcycles, and a lot of people were looking for very specific information. So that then led to like more people at MotoAmerica asking questions. And so eventually I just talked to AIM, and they were like, hey, why don't you come on board? And, we'll just support you, whatever you need. And, we'll put you on contract for MotoAmerica. So now every time that there is a MotoAmerica event, I have, a box of supplies like sensors. I can repair systems. I can help. Like, I'm there to actually help people answer questions with, how to install or calibrate their sensors and how to use their systems or how to like fix bugs.
Okay, so tell us who you'll be working for specifically next year, and are you available if Sean has an issue with his R6 and at the track and says, hey, can you help me with this, or are you locked into certain people because there's only so much time in the day?
So everybody that's using an AIM system in the paddock, I will be there to help them. Okay. But I will be on contract as well to work for M4. I will be their electronics person on the super sports side. So if anyone needs to find me, they can find me outside of super sports hours.
Okay. Now, when you get up every day and you live in Milwaukee, do you go to the Harley-Davidson factory and work there? Like, is that your day job and then your weekend job switches?
Yeah. So I have a lot of free time, I guess. I'm pretty much trying to use all of my free time and turn it into something productive, I guess. No, so I am an engineer for Harley-Davidson. That's my day job, my 9 to 5. I don't have to go to the office every day. And that's really why I'm able to do so much, I think, with MotoAmerica. I work from home quite a bit because I'm on, the data analysis side. But I'm what they called a performance or powertrain performance engineer. And my team is responsible for developing the new engines, choosing configurations, providing base calibrations with, performance numbers. And then we eventually give that to what we call the calibrators that then put the engine on the bike and then go ride it and, just fine tune it. But, as far as how many, Harley is always 2 cylinders, but like what the displacement is going to look like, what cam we're going to use, what technology we're going to put in the engine, what the future technologies that we're going to see in Harley engines, that's the role of my team.
Okay, I have 2 questions, and then I'm going to let Sean loose on you. First of all, were you a racing fan that turned this into a job, or was it a job that you turned into, or is it a job that ended up making you a fan?
It's a job that ended up making me a fan. I have no ties to motorsports from growing up at all. Even though I grew up 2 hours from the circuit of Le Mans, like my family I grew up in a farm. Like I had a Pee-wee 50 or 80 when I was a kid, and kind of like nothing until I was able to afford my own motorcycle. And when I had my first job in the US, so I moved to the US in 2014 to finish school to get a master's degree. And I got my first job. I was like, hey, I want to learn how to ride my motorcycle on a racetrack. And I really didn't know about track days. I just thought you would just go racing essentially, or do like a race school and then go racing. And I found a track day, put my motorcycle on the racetrack, and I was like, this is super fun. And then I think my first MotoAmerica event was just before COVID or during COVID, that weird year where you had like repeat rounds. And I just couldn't stay and do nothing and just watch racing. I just ended up going into the paddocks and talking to racers and realized that some guys in Junior Cup and Twins Cup were not using any data logger at all. And that's how I got started. I actually started helping one racer and then finished the season in 2020 with them. And then got on for the entire 2021 season. So that was Twins Cup, and then did another. So I've been in MotoAmerica for 3 years now. But I really started because I was like, hey, do you want to put a data logger on your bike? You would learn a lot.
Chloe, I want to ask you, I've got a million questions, as Paul alluded to, but to start with, you had said about your master's. So where did you go to college for undergrad, and where did you go to get your master's degree?
So I grew up in France. My family is still there. I wanted to go into the military at first because I always knew that I wanted a job that was not always at a desk, and that was kind of like using a little bit of, my intellect, but also be somewhat physical or somewhat be outdoors. So I thought the military was an option. I didn't think about motorsports. So I went to a military high school, decided that the military was really not for me. And so went to engineering school thinking that I was going to build planes. And I did my first internship. So I went to an engineering school in France in the Champagne region. It's called UTT, for University of Technology of Troyes, or Troyes, like the Greek city.
Ah, yes.
And and then did an internship for a company that makes aircraft engines and learned about engines more and thermodynamics. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And so I actually finished my engineering school doing what they call an apprenticeship. So you would see that more like in trade schools in the US. But in France, we actually do that for engineering. And it's really cool because I found my apprenticeship with John Deere tractors, but they have like a specific engine division. And so I would go to school for 2 weeks, and then I would go to work and work on a project for 2 weeks. And I would alternate like that it was like 2 weeks for 2 years, and then 6 months and 6 months for the last year. And John Deere being an international company, or being an American company, since we had to do an internship abroad, they just sent me to Iowa. They're like, hey, here is the logical destination for you. Yeah, and it was in January too. My first day in the US, it was minus 45 outside.
Well, I was going to say that is where John Deere is based in Iowa. So you went right to the mothership. Yeah, that's
my first day ever in the US. Yeah.
Wow.
But I guess I liked it enough that I stayed. I was doing noise and vibration testing, but still working in engine dynos. And I liked it enough, I guess, that I came back. So went back to France to finish my semester, and then I actually went to Michigan for an exchange semester, and then finished my French school, like my last internship, at John Deere in the US. And then applied. I met a bunch of engineers that were really smart at John Deere, and they all had a master's degree or a PhD from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. There is a lab there called the Engine Research Center. So I applied there and got accepted. And that's where I went. So I spent 2 other years in the US, and then I never left.
So you had a connection in the Midwest for quite a while then, really. I mean, it's not just like you were suddenly thrust into Milwaukee when you joined Harley-Davidson. You had some familiarity.
Yeah, my project in grad school was actually in part sponsored by Harley-Davidson. When I graduated, I actually I wanted to work for Harley. I wanted to work on motorcycle engines, but you need a visa to work in the US. And at the time, Harley was not in a position to sponsor visas. So I went to work for Cummins in Indiana. That has nothing to do with motorcycle engines. Didn't specifically like Indiana, although Cummins is a really good company. And then I moved to Tennessee and worked for Oak Ridge National Lab, which is a big government lab that does a bunch of stuff. I mean, they have a lot of different disciplines for research. But I was specializing in internal combustion engines. And it's a lab that was created for the Manhattan Project in the 40s. So it's really
Wow.
interesting. A lot of history there.
It's interesting also, so you said you had grown up on a farm. Did you ever have John Deere tractors when you were younger, or the family, did they have them, or do you have a different brand?
Now they're too expensive. We had Massey Ferguson, and I think we had Massey Ferguson because my dad had a good relationship with the dealership, and they have a factory in France.
It's funny because when I was a kid, we used to, I didn't grow up on a farm, but I worked on a lot of farms. I was in a farmer community, and I used to always like to keep track of how many different brands of tractors there were. And alongside that, it kind of went into the idea of a lot of these tractor companies also had snowmobiles. And I grew up in an area where there was a lot of snow. So that was kind of my first foray into power sports, which led to motorcycles. But it's amazing. It's probably less now. A lot of them are kind of owned by conglomerates, but you would mention Massey Ferguson. And I mean, a lot of these, Minneapolis Moline, and there's so many of them that were kind of from the Midwest of the US, which makes sense from an agrarian community, or an agrarian area, which is what certainly that, the heartland of the US is. So I guess it makes sense to be there, but that's cool that you were indoctrinated. Was it, other than the temp, was it warmer all year round and where you grew up in France, or were you used to cold, or was it a kind of an awakening for you when you came to Iowa, like you said?
You have to talk about the weather.
Well, I know you're right. I know I can't help it, but at least it wasn't Paul and I starting out. I mean, I kind of want to understand a little bit of climate you started out in.
So I'm from Northwest France. It's a region called Brittany.
Okay.
And it's just under the UK. So as you can imagine, it's close to the ocean. It's pretty temperate all year. Never too cold, never too warm. But I mean, we still have a little bit of temperature oscillation. It actually snowed yesterday there. But it's very comparable to maybe the Pacific Northwest. Like it can rain a lot during the day, but like several times. You'll see the sunlight during the day, but it just oscillates a lot.
One thing that I'm amazed about with Harley-Davidson, and so you're a co-worker of obviously Kyle Wyman and Travis Wyman, as well as several other people at Harley-Davidson, but you actually are there, and your close friend Josh Merrill, did you guys both start at Harley-Davidson at the same time?
No, I kind of got him into it. I'm the culprit.
So he followed you, which he should be doing. There's no doubt about it.
Exactly.
Okay.
He's sound-minded. And I think he likes it. He's actually doing noise testing. He's working in a really cool cell that is insulated in. So if you just see a big cube, it's insulated on the walls and on the roof. And they have a dyno in there, and they're testing. They do what they call indoor pass-by. So they're actually testing the sound of the motorcycle, and you know how important it is for Harley-Davidson.
Potato, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool. Do you guys see each other at all during the day, or are you in separate parts of the building, or how does that work?
I work from home most of the time. So I probably go to the building when I have to run the engine. So I'm actually going this afternoon. We're testing the race engine. And yeah, no, so I try not to, and just stay professional, right?
Yeah. I'm fascinated with the fact that I see it from the point of view of the Wymans. Well, actually both of them, but I mean, the fact that Travis last year raced a BMW, I don't know what he's doing this year, and I don't mean to say other than King of the Baggers, because that's huge too. And it's a full-time job, and it is going to be for Kyle this year. Kyle rode a BMW last year. You work for Harley and also are going to be working with M4. Harley's got a pretty open policy. They don't seem to have any issues with the quote conflict of interest that everybody likes to bring up a lot of times, but Harley doesn't seem to have a problem with it, do they?
Not in racing. I think Kyle and Travis were really careful to put in their contract that they wanted to have the opportunity to ride for Superbike if they could. I think that's their own contract. They really did their own thing. As far as my involvement in MotoAmerica, as long as I'm not working for another bagger team, there's absolutely no problem. It's what I do during my weekends. So that's only, that's my own hobby in a way. So I don't know that it's a Harley Harley-Davidson policy. It's however you're managing your contract, I think, as far as the riders. I can't really speak for Kyle or Travis in that regard, but it's cool. It's cool that they can still run a superbike when they have the opportunity to.
Well, we saw this last year with you when you were working in some capacity with RoBEM Engineering. I think you were their data person. Isn't that correct?
Yep, correct.
And you were, and also you have a vested interest in the Harley-Davidson program with King of the Baggers. So it sounds like you said, you know, if anybody has questions about systems at the end of the day, you could talk to them. But it sounds like even though you're going to be doing stuff with them for like the situation with RoBEM last year, you will have some involvement in the HD Screaming Eagle team on race weekends as well, or not?
I have a huge vested interest in the King of the Bagger. I think, well, first of all, it's my 9 to 5. Like, I am the test engineer for the King of the Bagger engine. So I'm responsible for developing the engine in Engine Dyno. So it's a big part of my day job. I don't think it should be, but it really took over because I think I want to in a way. So I want to make sure that the engine is running properly. I want to make sure that it's calibrated properly, that it's delivering power the way we intended to. So there are a couple times where I went over to the tent and checked that everything was okay. So yeah, I mean, I have a very big vested interest because Harley winning is, you know, is making my day job a lot better.
Right.
Now, I've also seen, Chloe, you're not just somebody that sits in front of a computer. I've seen you at the racetrack, like building wire harnesses and things like that. I've seen social media posts where you're welding. Is this all stuff that's kind of the welding especially? I mean, is that kind of something that was self-taught? I mean, that's not something you would do even in engineering school, is it?
No and yes. So during my master's in Madison, Wisconsin, we could have taken welding classes. So through undergrad and through my master's, we actually had access to machine shops, through different classes for welding and stuff like that. I did all of the machining things. I never really learned how to weld. Mm-hmm. So yeah, last week, actually this week was my opportunity. But the really cool thing about engineering is that you have to be hands-on in a way. The master's that I did was not only coursework. So you can do a master's degree doing just classes. And I think it's like 12 classes. There's a set number of credits, or you can do some research. And the way I did it, I was actually paid to do research for 2.5 years. And I built an entire test bench. So I had this little V-twin engines from Kohler. It was a lawnmower engine. And I modified it to actually receive a direct injector and put a whole data acquisition system on it. An entire, like, it's not an ECU, but it's essentially like a research ECU where you have a bunch of modules you put together. And so I built that by myself. So I had to understand control system. I had to understand manufacturing or machining. I had to start, putting pipes together. And so I had to understand like all the different fittings that you're using, calibrating sensors and all that. So it's something that was really cool through school to be able to do. And so that gave me a little bit of confidence to start tinkering on motorcycles. But then, yeah, I started doing track days. I raced a little bit. So working on my motorcycle is something that you kind of have to do. I mean, so like club racing is a privateer effort.
That's cool. On your social media, we see that you have your own bike and, you're fully involved in racing and track day riding and everything there is about it. So obviously you've got a huge passion for it. And it sounds like you probably had or developed a passion when you were in school for aviation. And I'm always kind of fascinated with the fact that it seems like there's a lot of synergy between motorcycle racers, motorcycle mechanics, and motorcycle people and aviation. I mean, Steve Rapp is a commercial pilot now. Steve Scheibe has a helicopter he flies. Aviation is fairly common between motor and it seems like every guy that's a pilot loves motorcycles. So have you seen that too, that there's like a connection there?
I've noticed that. I think it's just the safety aspect. You have to be very diligent in what you're building. I mean, if you have a car and you need to stop the car, it stops on 4 wheels and it stands there. You know, if you have to stop a motorcycle when you're going really fast, that's, you know, it can be a little bit of a problem. And if you have to stop an airplane, same thing, you know, you're in the air. So I think there's a lot more of a safety aspect. And so a good airplane mechanic is usually going to be a really good motorcycle mechanic just because of their, you know, their attention to detail.
Wow, that's a really good analogy. I love that. I've never thought about it that way, but that's very true. It makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you with regard to M4, for their super sport bikes, which they have GSXR 750s. I don't know if they're still going to have a 600 this year, but you know, middleweight bikes, and obviously the 750 came into being with the work of Chris Ulrich and what he's done with the electronic throttle kit, and that he helped develop, and they're the source for it worldwide, which has made that 750 part of super sport. But electronically, do those bikes, like I'm familiar with like what's used on super bikes with regard to Morelli or Motec, what do those bikes use for electronics?
Well, so because it's super sport next generation, they have to have the Medtronic ECU.
Right.
So I think the R6 might be the only one that doesn't need it, but the Medtronic ECU is used for balancing in the class. So Medtronic is supplying maps that are cutting, I think it's throttle position, and that's why the 750 actually needed an electronic throttle body, so that Medtronic ECU could control the throttle opening and manage the power band. So everybody, I think the V2 has to, the F3 if we had it, and the 750 have to use, and the Triumph have to use the Medtronic ECU. So that's very common in the it's common throughout the entire next generation platform, essentially. And it's pretty cool. I mean, it's you can do a lot. You can start, you know, playing with engine braking, traction control. They have different power modes. You don't have access to the entire maps because the manufacturers are obviously not giving their secrets to everyone, but you can add trims on, you know, your fuel maps and your ignition maps.
So the super sport bikes then don't really have the electronic interventions that the super bikes, like lift control, launch control, all of those kind of things?
They do. They do. It's not as important because the power delivery is not the same. But you still have traction control, you still have a launch control strategy. Like I said, engine braking, wheelie control, all of that. Traction control, actually, I might be mistaken. I don't think there is traction control. It's traction control or wheelie control that's not available on that Medtronic ECU.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. I didn't realize. I knew that Medtronic system eliminated. Obviously, it was a cable-operated throttle like motorcycles used to be. And to your point, yes, that's true. The R6 is fly-by-wire. The Honda, if Honda was raced in our series, is fly-by-wire. I'm pretty sure Triumph is as well. Obviously, Ducati, MV Agusta, if they raced in our series. I mean, I think all of them were. I think just the GSXR 600 wasn't, and the 750 wasn't. So yeah.
So Suzuki uses a primary throttle and a secondary throttle. So they're using the secondary throttle valve as sort of a replacement for a drive-by-wire system. So there's one throttle plate that's controlled by the ECU and the other one that's directly controlled by the cable.
Oh, that I didn't know. Okay, interesting. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so when you're building the SV650 actually has that too. So when you're building a twins bike, the first thing that people do usually is just, well, they're boring the throttle bodies and they're removing that secondary throttle valve.
And with the Medtronic system and the fly-by-wire system that is sold by Team Hammer, does that eliminate one of those throttle valves then?
It would have to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And with the idea of the intervention, the one thing that I have noticed in talking to riders or talking to teams is this idea that if you do something to affect one parameter of a bike, it can have an effect on another parameter. Have you experienced that? And is it sometimes you have to kind of find a common denominator or something that works for every, how does that work? Can you go down a rabbit hole is what I'm saying, and not be able to, well, if I fix this, it's going to screw this up. So how do I make it all work together as a system? That's got to be hard to do.
Yeah, so I have, just to backtrack on that a little bit, I have a huge chance to work for an OEM. And so at the Harley level, I'm able to see what's behind the ECU. We have access to, the strategy and the calibration. So the calibration are all the tables and the numbers you put in the tables. The strategy is how those tables are interacting with each other. And a lot of the times in racing, you don't have access to the strategy. It's very rare. You might be able to do that maybe at a Morelli, like the top level of the Morelli and Motec ECUs, when you have the like the high level license. Most of the time, all you have access to is, the calibration tables and not even the actual numbers. You usually have you can play with percentage of the base calibration. So you're not seeing all of those proprietary numbers. You can just play with adding or subtracting a little bit of a fuel or spark or whatever. So, if you were to race, let's say a Harley, and let's say the Harley had all the rules were open and we had traction control, we could potentially go behind the ECU and change how traction control and wheelie control are defined, and we could separate them in a way that one doesn't affect the other, if you want. What happens in our series and what happens when you're a privateer and you're not a factory team, you don't have access to all that information. So sometimes most of the time you have to play with the strategy that you're given, and in a lot of cases some strategies are not super advanced. And so if you're tweaking wheelie control, you could affect traction control, for example. So traction control and wheelie control are often detected through, they're always detected through wheel speed sensors. And it's a difference between the front and the rear. But you have to have additional information to tell you, is it the front wheel speed that's going down, or is it the rear wheel speed that's going up, meaning that you're spinning on corner exits. And all you see is a difference between the wheel speeds. So sometimes, you have advanced strategies that have an IMU, and the IMU tells you, oh, the motorcycle is actually pitching up, so that's a wheelie. Or you have other information that can tell you, well, it's the rear wheel that's actually stepping out. So it's just a matter of how advanced your strategy is, how much access you have to it, and kind of the level of complexity of it.
Is it true that engine braking is actually become the most important?
Yes. And from talking to people at Moto2 level, they don't have traction control on Moto2 bikes, but engine braking is the biggest thing. And the thing is, engine braking is very different depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to somebody who comes from flat track, they don't really care. They want to, they're fine if the bike is sliding, backing it in the corner. Right. That's totally fine for them. And you have people that don't like that. So you have to make sure that the two wheels are in line and they never lose contact with the ground, and they can just smoothly enter the corner. So it's important because it's subjective, I think.
Now, is that something you work with the Harley, or is that?
No, so Harley, the King of the Bagger series, is not allowed to have wheel speed sensors.
Oh, that's true.
So by removing wheel speed sensors, you're removing engine braking, traction control, wheelie control.
Right. Okay. So
I wish it would be really cool.
Yeah, it would give you more stuff to play with.
Exactly.
Yeah, Chloe, one of the things I learned last podcast when we had James Rispoli on is, those bikes are so long that I didn't think they slid around that much, but he corrected me on that. He said, yeah, they move quite a bit. And I didn't really get a sense from watching them. I guess, they don't hang them out real far, but I guess they do break loose a little bit. So that's interesting. There would be something you could do to solve that in that class for sure, which is interesting.
It's honestly been requested, and I was internally pushing for it, obviously, because I think it's fun to have more electronics, but it's something that if you talk to Kyle, I think he would tell you that it would really be nice to have. I think his crash might have been at Brainerd, was caused because he lost the rear. And you can go back and watch some of the King of the Bag races, and you'll see that they're backing it in the corners. I mean, look at maybe Laguna turn 2. It's yeah, I mean, they're very heavy bikes.
Yeah.
So.
You know what I think? I think for me, I think I was thinking, okay, they might do it when they're applying the rear brake or whatever, but I didn't think under acceleration the bike would do it. But I guess they do that as well, which is pretty incredible to imagine with the weight and size of those bikes. It's amazing.
I think there's a factor that comes into it where those bikes are so heavy, they're using the same tires that super bikes are using. So I mean, your tire wear is a factor, and I think that's one of the reasons their races are shorter.
Right.
It's because you would never have the tire longevity that you have on a lighter bike. So yeah, I mean, towards the end of a race, they don't have that much grip anymore.
That's right. I wanted to ask you, so a long time ago in a land far, far away, even I shouldn't date Wayne Rainey too much, but back when he raced, there was some electronics. I mean, there was a lot of talk back then about things like telemetry, and telemetry is used in other forms of motorsports, of course. We don't have it, and I don't know if there's any plan to get it. And it's not like it doesn't exist. It could be used, but it seems like related to costs or whatever. It's not part of our sport. Would you like to have that in our paddock?
Yeah, of course, it would be sweet. So there's so many levels that you can have. Like you have in Superbike, you have sectoring, so you can have different calibration maps for different areas of the track. So that's a level above. It's not quite telemetry yet,
right?
But then you have full broadcast during the race, and to some extent you guys at MotoAmerica have some telemetry because you're able to see live speeds or brake pressure sometimes. Like on the MotoAmerica broadcast you have some data, but it's just not it's not something that we see, except like we only see the sectors. But something like MotoGP would be sweet, where maybe the teams don't see everything, but the broadcast has when they zoom on Marquez or the front runners, and you see their acceleration, you see their lean angle, you see their brake pressure, and you have their onboard camera, like the shoulder camera is really cool. That is a form of telemetry that would be really cool,
Right. Yeah, let me be a little more specific, Chloe. I mean, I'm talking about the kind of telemetry where you can make adjustments on the fly remotely.
I think that's dangerous. I don't, MotoGP, sorry. Formula One, they can talk directly to the driver. I don't think on a motorcycle you'd want to do that.
Right.
I wouldn't go to something that's drastically different from what MotoGP is doing. So, communication with the rider is only through pit boards, and I think that's fine. It would be too overwhelming, I think, to have radio communication.
I can't imagine someone talking to me when I was riding.
Yeah.
Especially because it would interrupt my singing.
There you go. So on top of that, requesting, like, let's say that your rider is requesting a change and you're making a change during your race. Our chassis are not, they're more reactive than a car chassis. So I wouldn't want to make something that, would eject a rider. I don't know how smooth that could be. I think it could be dangerous, but for endurance racing, that could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, that would help in endurance racing. I think what it is. I remember in the past, people would talk about motorcycle racing and think, well, someday it's going to be like remote control vehicles where the people in the pits have control, and the rider isn't really doing anything. It's being controlled by somebody in the pits or whatever. And obviously, the rider is vitally important to the whole thing, of course. I don't envision that happening anytime in the near future, but I guess who knows down the road.
No, and motorcycles are very, very interesting for so many reasons. So compared to cars, our tires are round. And so your wheel speeds is not just what the sensor sees. You have to correct your wheel speed for your lean angle, because as soon as you start leaning into the corner, you're on the side of the tire. So your circumference of your tire is smaller. So one rotation of your tire doesn't cover the same distance as when you're straight up and down. So to have an accurate wheel speed, you have to account for that, but you would also have to account for the deformation of the tire under load and for tire wear, because the shape of your tire really changes. And I gave a podcast, I had another podcast last weekend. It's going to be released, I think, in a couple of weeks for High Performance Academy, which is it's a company that provides classes for motorsports related stuff, but they're mostly car guys. And that's something that just blew their mind. The fact that our wheel speeds are changing with lean angle and that our tire, like the properties of our tires are so complicated. So if you wanted to be able to just have everything controlled by electronics, you'd have to be extremely good at modeling tires. And even at MotoGP level, it's not done it's not done fully yet. So it's still very important to have a good rider. And one kind of data engineering mentor, Neil Vasavada, who used to work for Jordan and Yosh at the time, and was actually involved in TOBC this year, told me, you have to remember that motorcycle racing, at the end of the day, it's not an engineering endeavor, it's an athletic endeavor. So you still have to cater to the rider. You have to make sure that the rider is comfortable on the bike. You could have the best bike ever, it could be really well set up. If there's something that's wrong with the rider, they're not comfortable, it's not going to work.
Very true.
Yes. So much so that it drives me nuts with cars. You pointed out the safety of a car, and when it stops, it doesn't fall over, it doesn't crash like a plane would or anything. But what drives me nuts about a car is, it's up to the camber of the turn, whether it's negative or positive camber. You can't affect that in the car. You can't lean the car in or lean the car out or do anything like that. So it's really weird. I mean, I know that it is what it is, and there have been a lot of motorcycle racers who have raced cars later on in their life or have done it at some point, and that transition just seems so weird to me.
Yeah, it is. And
Yeah.
cars are complicated in their own way. They have a lot more pumps, and you can turbocharge them or supercharge them. Like they can accept a lot more power. You're pushing the engines a lot more, so you have to start worrying about knock, and it's just a different engineering problem. On a motorcycle, honestly, you start being limited in how much power you can deliver, and that's why MotoGP starts having all of those downforce, all of those aero stuff, so they can actually have some downforce. Because I mean, you're putting what's the 600? It's about 170 kilos.
Right.
A rider is maybe 70 kilos, like on average, and it's 130 horsepower. It's a huge power to weight ratio compared to a car. So the problem on a motorcycle is not so much how much power can we make, it's how can I keep this power on the ground? So how can I transfer this power to the rear wheel, and how can I keep the rear wheel on the ground? So yeah, you're looking at very different problematics than you're looking at in car racing.
So I know we're running out a little bit out of time, and we know you've got other commitments and meetings and things, but I wanted to make sure I ask you this. So yesterday we had put a post up on social media where we shared that V21J, I think it's called, the Ducati bike that's going to be racing in Moto E. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this. Your training and education and experience to this point has revolved around the internal combustion engine. It seems like these electric bikes are just, a wave that we're not going to be able to stop. And I would expect sometime in the near future, we're going to have an e-bike class in MotoAmerica. And we had electric bikes racing in the Roland Sands Designs Super Hooligan Championship last year. So electric bikes are going to happen. How do you feel about all that?
It's okay. I mean, yes, I have a master's in internal combustion engines, but at some point you have to go with your times. And I think it's also why I'm so interested in engine management strategies and electronics. It's because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what powertrain you have on a bike, you're still going to have brakes and a throttle, and you're still going to have some kind of power delivery that you're going to have to manage. And I think even more so on an electric bike, where you have maximum torque right away and you have like more linear torque, you're still going to have traction controls and especially more wheelie control in that case. So this whole racing thing and my involvement in electronics is also my way to maybe not get out of engine calibration, but just make sure that I can do something else. And Harley has Livewire, even though they're two separate companies. They're still in the same, like, we still have some of the R&D of Livewire. So even Harley-Davidson, which is probably the last company that's going to abandon the internal combustion engine, is still planning for electric bikes. So yeah, I mean, you have to embrace that at some point. I'll probably try to hang on the internal combustion side as much as I can, but also learning more about electronics and control strategy. So we have to.
All right, Chloe. Well, coming into this, I actually questioned your intelligence because you date my good friend and fellow Padre fan, Josh Merrill. But you changed my mind on that today, and I thank you for joining us. I know you've got some meetings because that's what smart people have, although sometimes they have too many of them, but that's a subject for another day. But anyways, I really appreciate you coming on. You do a wonderful job of explaining things that most of us don't understand. So I appreciate that, and we look forward to seeing you, I imagine, at Daytona and beyond. So, good luck for the coming season. I know Sean has a little plea here at the end of the podcast, but yeah, thanks again for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And if any of our listeners need any AIM systems, just let me know. Make sure that you contact me before MotoAmerica weekend so I can make sure that I have everything you guys need. And yeah, come find me at the M4 tent when we're not on track or not debriefing.
Yeah, that sounds good. Chloe, I'll tell you, my head is about 10 sizes bigger than yours. And I don't know how you fit everything in that cranium of yours, because I couldn't fit it all in mine. You must make very efficient use of the space in the gray matter up in that skull of yours.
You do have a big head, Sean.
I do. It's huge.
I have a very small head too.
You use it efficiently.
Exactly.
But anyway, yeah, thanks for being on with us. So I just want to mention, I'm going to mention this every closing of our podcast right up until Daytona, and it's about corner marshals again. I know Chloe can even vouch for the fact that corner marshals are so important in our sport for our safety of our riders, and we can never have enough of them, as Chief Marshal David Hawley says. So make sure you guys go to basically Motorsports Reg you can go to, which is a website, but the way to get to it is go through the MotoAmerica Volunteers Facebook page. There are links on there to go to sign up to be a corner marshal, and it's everything from no experience, never having been to a track, to experienced guys. We need all kinds of people in the paddock, on pit road, out on the track. And as I always say, it's the best seat in the house in terms of getting up close and personal with the bikes and the riders always appreciate you guys out there with the flags or anything you're doing for us. So I'm going to continue to pump that on our podcast so that we get as many people to get involved with us as possible. And I mean, you get free admission for the weekend, you get free camping, meals, all kinds of great stuff. Like I say, you get to meet the riders who really appreciate having you. So I just want to put that out there for you. And again, thanks, Chloe, for being with us this week.
Thank you, guys.
All right, you guys have a good rest of your week.